Hey, everybody. Randy Patterson here with Boomerocity. When we go to concerts or we listen to an album, there's oftentimes those unsung heroes who are in the background and they're playing the music or they're singing the backup vocals. There's a great documentary called 20 Feet from Stardom, which is about the backup singers that are behind some of the biggest stars. And there's also these touring musicians, these studio musicians that maybe if we're paying real close attention, some of us might recognize one or two, but then we just kind of focus on who's at the main microphone or microphones, as the case might be. But when you dig into those people who are in the background, those are the top shelf musicians, the top shelf vocalists. And there's many who are legends amongst those circles. And one of those people is a gentleman by the name of Tony Levin. He's a sensational bass player. He's at among those top session and touring musicians who artists gravitate to immediately. You'll recognize him in music videos or concert videos, especially like with Peter Gabriel. He was the original bassist with King Crimson. He toured with Peter Frampton, Chuck Mangione, Todd Rundgren, Seal, Paul Simon, Carly Simon, Judy Collins, and a whole ton of others. And he's also this is August of 2024, and later in a month or two, he's going to start a tour with a group called Beat, which is a group of guys, including Steve Vai and Andrew Blue and others, who are going to go back and play the original King Crimson stuff. And that is not easy to play, especially if you're a musician. That's not easy to play. So I caught Tony just before he's about to go into a rehearsal with Steve Vai and the guys, and we had a great talk about this new album that he has coming out called Bringing It Down to the Bass. And this was a phenomenal album. I encourage you to get it, but please listen to this interview. It's a lot of fun. I think you'll really enjoy it. Watch it, like it if you don't mind, subscribe to us if you don't mind, and please share it with others. So without any further ado, here's my first of what I hope are many more interviews to come with bass great Tony Levin. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson with Boomerocity. Take care.
Hi, Randy. How are you doing?
Great. I believe you hold the record of being the most precisely on time artist I've ever talked to. So where are you dialing in from?
I'm in Los Angeles as we speak, rehearsing in an hour. I'm going to rehearsal with for the Beat tour. We're just in the early stage of rehearsing, learning some very difficult music, and it's pretty exciting and early stages. And when we next speak, or when I next see you, I'll be on the road to being a road dog and doing the shows.
Wow. I know that when I interviewed Steve a couple months back, we talked briefly about this tour coming up and just the respect he has for that catalog of music and being able to work with you guys. That he may not remember me, but tell him I said hello. I was Matt Bissonette's friend, and so we kind of had that little informational triangle going there. So, but
yeah, well, I will pass that on to him, and he's got the heavy lifting. For those who don't know, the Beat tour, we're doing the music of King Crimson in the 80s. I was there the first time around. That doesn't mean it's easy for me, but Steve is taking on the guitar parts of Robert Fripp, many of which are very extremely technically difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So he's doing that hard work, and I'm along for the ride, but I'm finding my old stick parts a little difficult. I seem to have been in a habit of playing in different time signatures on different sides of the Chapman stick. And it must have become sometimes when you play something a lot, it just gets in your fingers and you don't need to think about it. And you can sing a vocal that's in a whole different time signature. It ain't in my fingers yet. So I'm finding quite a bit of work. And it's good for me that we have a lot of rehearsing time.
It's the muscle memory that kicks in there, isn't it? Well, I know like that musicians tend to make bass player jokes, but I've interviewed enough of you guys to know that playing bass and this is not to sound patronizing, so please don't take it that way, but God, listening closely to people like you, to Matt, to John Entwistle, the late John Entwistle, Nathan East, thought, you guys carry a pretty heavy load yourself, especially when you're just not trying to mail it in, when you're really adding to the art of the music. It's significant, and that I think people fail to zero in on that and appreciate what you guys do. That's just coming from me, but I'm sure those that listen closely feel the same way. So,
Well,
but
thank you. Let me say that I love your backdrop. I find it very interesting.
what I feel like I
Uh,
got a
uh,
lot of eyes on me.
Well, being a bass player, I don't really think quite about it that way. I just like playing the bass, and sometimes it is indeed very simple. Sometimes it's complicated, but I don't think, oh, I want to play simple. I want to play complicated. I want to play the bass, and I've played big variety of music for backing up a lot of different kinds of artists, including folk music, where the bass function is pretty simple. And
Right.
I enjoy it all. If I like the music, then I like the function of playing the bass part, and I don't try to bring to it something that doesn't feel appropriate to that music. So with King Crimson, and in my new album and in on the Beat Tour, the music can be a little complex, and I'm comfortable with that.
What have you found for the Beat Tour? I was going to ask it last, but since we're talking about it now, I'll go ahead and ask you, what's been the most, from a song perspective, what is the most difficult for you to figuratively and literally get your hands around this time around? Like you said, you were playing it in the beginning and helping create this stuff. What's showing to be a challenge for you today?
Uh, like I said before, it's the stick parts, the bass parts. I've got the same bass. I have 4-string bass that I was playing back in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and the bass parts are under my fingers. Nothing too complicated. The stick parts, I was playing different time signatures on a few pieces on the top and on the bass side. It's got stereo guitar strings and bass strings, and then sometimes singing out of time with singing background vocals with Adrian, watching his lips to sync with him. So to do that, like we said, the muscle memory has to be there. That's the most challenging part. The whole thing at the moment is made a lot easier because the musicianship of the other guys is fantastic. Of course, Adrian Belew, I've been together with him since the 80s, since the
Mm-hmm.
early 80s, 81, when we formed the new King Crimson at that time. So the other guys are super, and I just have to not embarrass myself on the bass parts, and we're going to be fine.
I hear you. So before we get to the new album, I mean, reading over your career and some of your interviews and such, you're a touring animal. And when you're not touring, you're in the studio. I mean, you're probably one of the hardest working musicians I've had the privilege of speaking with. And so, how, I guess the basic question is, has the road changed much for you over the years, or is it pretty much the same as it was 40 years ago?
Good question. And in my experience, I refer to it as Road Dogs, and it's a piece on my new album called Road Dogs
My
without too
favorite
many
song
lyrics.
on
A
there,
few
by the
lyrics.
way. So,
Thank you. A few lyrics about what we do, but I am by no means the busiest or hardest working guy. I know guys who tour a lot more than me, but I do tour a lot, and when I'm not touring, I'm very lucky to have the chance to record at home on my album or on my music or other people's. People are always sending me files, and we trade files. That's the way you do it nowadays. I'm
mhm.
very lucky to be doing what I love. Has touring changed? Yeah, it's a lot different. It depends a lot on the level of band. Peter Gabriel and King Crimson, when we were touring with King Crimson, they're sort of kind of the way they were. Lights are they're fraught and delayed and stuff, but generally it's the same. But the lower level band, which is mostly the bands that I tour with, Stickman, Levin Brothers, a jazz band, the fact that hotels are a lot more expensive and gas is a lot more expensive. The clubs don't pay anymore. Maybe they charge more for tickets, but they don't pay anymore. So it becomes really problematic. And that's a big difference. And I don't want to spend our whole interview on it, but what's become an important part of that pie about the scene is the merchandise, the CDs. and T-shirts that we sell on tour. It used to just be for fun and a little extra money. Now it's crucial. If we didn't, I just did a tour with Stickman a month ago, and if we hadn't sold merchandise, we would have actually lost money on the tour. It's funny. We're doing the same. We're playing to the same number of people in the same clubs, but the expenses have gone way up. So that's a big change in it. Again, I got to say, big picture, I'm really lucky to be able to do it. Yes, on a high level with Peter Gabriel, but also blogging around in a van, because those 2 hours every night when you get to play make the other 22 hours really worth it.
Yeah. Well, as a fan, we appreciate it too. I don't know that everybody does and knows what you guys go through to entertain us for those 2 hours, but for any of us who follow or get to talk to you guys, it's not lost on us how tough it is, and being away from family and, just all of that can be pretty lonely. So I thank you for all of that and for all the years of music that you contributed to. That's what's amazing. I mean, your resume is just friggin' phenomenal, But so this album,
Thank you.
gosh, was it your 7th studio album solo?
They tell me that, yes. I'm not counting. I know this. It's been a long time since I did one, because of this problem. I have this terrible problem of I get to go on the road with great bands and make great music. So that hasn't allowed me time to finish up the album. I've been I'm writing and kind of recording early versions of songs for 10 years or something. So I finally had the time, and I carved out a few months early this year, carved out 3 months to finish the job and to get some of the really lucky that I know great players, and so to get some of the great players I know to play on the ones that hadn't already. And so I assembled the album. I'm very happy with it. It's called Bringing It Down to the Bass, because that's certainly something I know about. And a lot of the pieces did begin with a bass groove or a bass technique or a bass sound that was specific and kind of sent me in the direction of that composition, but not all of them. Some of them go in other ways. It's just the main thing about the album, I got to say, is the players. If you read the list of players that I was able to assemble to play on it, they're very special. Just drummers alone, there were 7 of them on different tracks, and really great guys I love to play with. With Manu Katché, we were touring with Peter Gabriel, and I caught him I mean, he knew about it before, but on a night off in Montreal, I dragged him into the studio to play his part on that. And then my old friend Steve Gadd, a great drummer, Mike Portnoy, whom I was with in Liquid Tension Experiment, contributed on one piece, and Vinny Colaiuta here in Los Angeles, who I've done a lot of great albums with. I decided to do just a duo piece with him, so it's just stick and drums. So there's some interesting material, hopefully not only for musicians, but for just the music-loving public.
I saw on the one sheet that Steve Karras, who I love, by the way, he's like my brother in this business. He's a Superman. So you've done well to have him on as part of your team. But I read in the one sheet that he sent me that it took 5 or 6 years to make this album. I mean, being a little bit of a geek, I was in the tech industry for most of my so-called adult life, and I know that you can't go a year without software upgrades or total shifts of technology and all that. And with you working on that, I'm sure you've got your software that you work with, whether it's Pro Tools or something else. To spread an album being created over that period of time, did you run into any technological issues in carrying that along to be up to release time? Was there any issues like that?
Yeah, some. I use Logic. I record in Logic, and Logic changed through the years, but that wasn't a problem for me because it allows for updates to the new system, the Logic Pro X. Drum sounds is the big thing. I did, because I didn't do it all in the 3 months. I did some of them earlier. You get different sounds from different studios recorded by different engineers. And the key to that for me was picking the right guy to be the mixer, somebody with a lot of experience. And I'm very lucky I got Kevin Killen, with whom, we go back to the sledgehammer bass sound on Peter Gabriel's So album. Kevin was instrumental in that. And I thought, I know a lot of really cool engineers. And I thought, this is about the bass. Let me bring in a guy who I've done really exceptional bass sounds with him, and we'll start with that. And also, he has so much experience that he was able to make the drum sounds cohesive. So mainly it was the drum sounds. The stuff of recording the bass pretty much is simple. So that hadn't changed. And other guys have their own studios. I went in a bunch of studios. Technically, I didn't run into a lot of troubles with that.
Well, good deal. How would I listened through this album, and I mean, to me, if I was, well, I have said this to people that I've told about it, and I've said, all I can tell you is that it's full of surprises. You will not be able to pigeonhole it as far as a genre. Don't even bother trying to categorize it to novices like me. All right. So, but to you, how would you describe this album? How would you categorize it?
I am aware of genres. Most of us working musicians don't love falling into having to describe music in genres, but you have to. I understand that. So I'm inventing a new genre, bass. The bass genre, that's where this lies. It is a rock record. It's got some progressive. Usually I live in the progressive rock, certainly with King Crimson, progressive rock world. And I have that kind of material. As the album, sorry to go into a long answer, but as the album really came to form itself, I had way more music than I needed, and I had to choose which I used and which I didn't. I took out the prog compositions, the 12-minute pieces that are compositionally very special, but don't feature the bass at all and don't feature the players at all. Their compositions more. So I took them out for another album or another time. So this is all stuff that the features. It doesn't just feature the bass. There are some bass solos, but it's heavily rhythm section based, and I think it's a rock album that verges. There's no jazz in it, but there's horns on trumpet and trombone and saxophone on 2 or 3 of the pieces. But also, like you said, it's surprising. I'm not much of a singer, but sometimes if I have something I have to say, then I'll sing. And there's a barbershop quartet on it titled Side B, Turn It Over, about the experience that us older folks know of taking your LP, getting up and turning it over. And I kind of embraced that and wrote actually a poem about it that became a song. So there's that. And I also did in lockdown year, when I had no touring, I spent a lot of the year writing. Sometimes we get the stuff in our head and have to do it, musical stuff. So I had to write a piece, use a vocal piece with no instruments, just unaccompanied chorus, using only the names of drummers I had worked with. And that's a lot of drummers because I've had a long career. And I had all the names and musical ideas all over my studio for the whole year. Put it together into what I think is a meaningful composition. Does it belong on an album about bass? Sort of. Only in that it's a sort of a tribute and a thank you to these many drummers. By the way, it doesn't have all the drummers I've worked with, but a lot of them, really a lot of them. And so that's a surprise. And one could say it doesn't belong on a bass record, but there it is.
It's all rhythm, right? So I know this took you a few years to make, but I usually ask this question of those who maybe go into the studio and crunch it out in a 2 or 3 month time or less, and maybe they go in with preconceived ideas. But you've nursed this along over several years. But still, were there any surprises in your mind as you were putting this together, or maybe it was closer to the time of getting it to release date, that with all your experience recording and playing, that on this record you go, wow, wasn't expecting this, or I didn't know this would happen, or anything like that?
Yeah, all from the other players. First of all, there are many different, we all know there's many different ways to make a record. The way I've done it before is I get a drummer and I get a guitar player and a keyboard player. Here's my material. Let's record it all in a month, like you said, or 2 months. Very different ways to specifically. What I did is I wrote the song, got the bass part, and I thought in my dreams, what's the drummer of all the drummers, the many drummers I know? I started with the drums, and who's the guy that I would like to hear what he does with this? And then in almost all cases, he was there and able to do it. And then I didn't, that level of drummer, you don't really want to tell him what to play. You want to get the right guy and send him the track, and then be surprised or utterly flabbergasted by what he did. So that happened with almost every drum track. And I didn't ever say, oh no, you got to do another take and do this. Well, I wanted that person, and a great part, and I got a lot of surprises there. The perfect example of this, because it isn't just drums. It's the first piece called "Bringing It Down to the Bass" starts with a bass riff, then a horn section comes in. Manu Katché with one of those surprising. When I hear his drum fill when he enters at the beginning of that piece, near the beginning, I'm thinking nobody else would have done that. And then later in the piece, it breaks down. Dominic Miller plays a wonderful guitar solo, and then I had the whole piece and arranged for the horn players to come in to play the melody and kind of a horn section. And Alex Foster happened to be available to play the alto sax part. And I thought, man, he's an unbelievable soloist and player, but there's no room in here for a sax solo. So I added, this was before he came, but I added, okay, this piece ends. And then I came up with a whole different tempo, another bass riff, bringing it down to the bass, because that's the title of the song. And I faded out right away. It was so, maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And what he played just was so special. Of all of the, you hear your record a lot in the mixing, in the month and the year after you finish recording it. And of all of that, the thing that keeps making me smile, and I just kind of love the world of music, is when I hear what he played on that few, well, it's more than a few seconds, but yeah, he played fantastic. And I wish I hadn't faded it out as quickly as I had. So when we went to mix, Kevin Killen faded it out where I had it, and I kept sending. We were in the early stages of mixing. We were communicating by email, and I was saying, you got to go longer. And he said, well, if I go longer, it won't be a fade. It'll just suddenly. And so I was fighting for every last second of Alex's solo. That's a good example of not only surprise, but what these players give you when they come in. You spend a few hours of their life and they play on your music, and what they give you is really priceless. You can't put a price on it, because it's a wealth of talent and a whole lifetime of practicing and a familiarity with the kind of music and the genre, and they just give you that, and make a few bucks, and then they go home, and it's like, it's really precious. So that was not a surprise I didn't know about, but I was constantly surprised by the ability of the other players.
Well, that I didn't write this down, but it brings to mind that, obviously I've had the privilege of talking to a lot of great musicians, a lot of your peers and such. And one thing I've noticed is among you guys, at least my perception is, and tell me if I'm wrong, or don't if you want to keep it a secret. But for me, it's like you guys, nobody's intimidated or jealous of each other. You guys are top shelf. You're confident in your talents. You're humble in your talents, because I mean, I see it all the time. You guys are giving the credits and bowing to their way of doing things, and you come back in and add, and everybody's so receptive. It seems like the lower the level of talent, the bigger the egos and jealousies. At least as a fan, a non-musician observing, do you think that's a fair assessment?
I don't know anything about the different levels of talent and stuff. I know about the players I play with, and yeah, you're right. It's not competitive, and well, it comes from being a musician and playing music with other people, and you're not, your motivation isn't what it might be in some other fields. Your motivation is to make, I think, with most of us or almost all of us, is to make as good a total result of music as you can, and that involves the other players. I suppose if you were born and bred to be a solo player alone, then you'd be a different kind of person about other musicians, maybe. I don't know. But in my experience, yeah, the guys are great.
Which song on this new album would you point to as the calling card? Because I know you can't pick a favorite. It's like picking a favorite child. But what song would you point? For me, for whatever it's worth, I'd point to Road Dogs. I just love that song because I figured it came from the heart, if nothing else did, right? But what song would you point to saying, hey, if you don't like this song, you're really going to love the rest of the record?
Thanks for that. Yeah, I went through this same issue with the record label. They wanted to help me pick a signature song, and we ended up picking the first track, bringing it down to the bass, as really the pieces are all pretty different. So there was no one track that gives you the style of the whole record. I would have picked Road Dogs the same as you did. And we had a good reason for not choosing that, because that has a little bit of vocal in it.
Yeah.
Only speaking of, oh God, Road Dogs, Road Dogs. Let me tell you this quickly, the story behind that. But and as such, it's not really indicative of a mostly instrumental album. But Road Dogs is really special. So I've got this groove for an instrumental piece called Road Dogs, and it kind of compositionally it wanted to go into a shuffle, and I got, so I'm writing and recording the bass part of that, and it seemed to want to. I thought I'm going to overdub a fretless bass. There's a technique I have never used, but I've always wanted to. You know what a vocoder is, where you say the words, but it goes through an instrument. I always thought that would be good with a fretless bass, which kind of sounds like a voice anyway. So I thought, okay, I've got this groove I'm playing, and later I'm going to put the fretless bass on, and I don't want to forget the part I have in mind. And so I got a microphone and I sang. I was trying to sound like a fretless with a vocoder. I don't know what that'll sound like. I never did it. And Road Dogs are nothing but road dogs. So I did exactly that. Okay, fast forward a few months, and I'm trying different vocoders and stuff, and it sounds terrible. It just did, it was my idea was that it would be good. It just didn't work. It sounded really fake, and anyway, wasn't worth doing. And there is the vocal. So that's the vocal. So it wasn't intended as having a vocal at all. The vocal was kind of a marker about, here's what I'm going to do. And sometimes pieces are like that. They kind of go in their own. Sometimes you plan the whole thing and write it out. Sometimes you plan the whole thing and you put it on a tape. And this one, the piece just kind of went its own way, and it became a little bit of a vocal, mind you, only near the end of it.
And so again, I'm not a musician. I play a mean air guitar, and that's about it. But talking about the vocoder, I can't even say it. How is that different than what Peter Frampton does with, I think it's called a talk box, squat box, something like that? What's the differences between the two?
I don't know. Like I said vocoder. I don't know what I was talking about. When I tried a few of them, I did not try the talk box.
Yeah.
But anyway, that has a really distinctive sound. But I found it, the ones I tried, I found it a little too difficult to understand the words. We were like, what's he saying? And anyway, I'm not an expert at that end of technology. Well, I am an expert in that I knew when to put it down and not chase a thing that wasn't working musically. Yeah.
I know you got to run here in a minute, Tony, and I appreciate you taking this time. But what else is on your radar between now and the end of the year and going into next year?
I'm laughing because I have 65 shows to play, which will take me up until Christmas. So not much room for any more than that. Next year is typically in the fall, early fall. If you're lucky enough to have any plans at all for next year, it's still in the forming stages. I've learned when doing interviews, bad idea to talk about a tour that's going to happen next year because it might not happen. So right. I have some potential things, nothing big, but some potential stuff and a lot of empty spaces that I hope will fill in with good music.
Well, I hope to interview you a lot more in the years to come. You've been on my radar, and I was thrilled when Steve Karras made this possible. But so I may ask you this every other time we ask. And, it's not meant to be a macabre type of question, but when you step off the great tour bus of life up at the great gig in the sky to steal from Pink Floyd, how do you want to be remembered, and what do you hope your legacy is?
I don't have a great answer for that because it's not something I think about. I'm very lucky that I'm immersed in my music that I'm doing right now, and in my wonderful friends and in my wonderful family, and that's where my brain resides.
Fantastic. Well, I know you need to get to rehearsals. Please tell your buddy Steve Vai I said hello if he remembers me, and I'll let Steve Karras know that we had a great time chatting. At least I enjoyed it, and hope it wasn't too painful for you. So
thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and I appreciate being with you and the intelligence of your questions. Thank you.
Well, we'll talk again. All right, and please be safe out there. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.